Hey, everybody. It's Kevin, I guess me here, Zain, and Chris all together for a really exciting episode. We're talking about crowdsourcing. And so, Zain had a post recently. Chris and I talked a little bit about AI. And so we're going to pull everything together in this kind of conversation of how do we leverage the information that's already out there? How do we do some things that might not sound sexy and make them sexy? I mean, kind of like us, that we might not look sexy, but we are, promise. Talk to you guys in just Hey, everybody. All right. So crowdsourcing was kind of the real point to this and asking the audience. So when I said ask the audience, I thought, how many people are going to know what reference Kevin is making? Like, did you guys know the ask the audience reference? Like
Who Wants to Be a Millionaire?
Yeah.
Yes. Perfect. Good. I mean, I was always amazed, like when they polled the audience, like it was incredible how accurate the audience was, like on a percentage basis, like how the correct answer was what the audience was pooling. And so I think when it comes to us pulling some individual data sets in together and being able to pool these audiences, I'm really curious in healthcare where we can take that. And I was just reading an interesting article, Chris and Zain, when it came to the power of AI crowdsourcing. So we can get into that a little bit. But here's our first teaser, everybody. We're going to be talking about the really exciting and sexy drug, phenylephrine. So that was the whole really like spurring of this moment is why did it take so long, Zain and Chris, for us to identify a drug that both patients and care providers knew just didn't work?
I mean, I think it's just the way our studies work. So generally speaking, a drug comes out, a study is done because there's a whole push to get it to market and, get it approved. And then after that drug is approved, the problem is running these studies is really expensive. And for better or for worse, drug companies are the ones that are funding most of these studies. And also, they also don't want to work against their own interests. So as if once the drug is approved and it's got the indications, they're just going to move on to the next one. It's just unfortunately the system we live in. That's why these remote studies and all these companies coming in to make studies cheaper and easier, more access is interesting to us inside the healthcare world. It's exciting stuff for us because we understand that it can lead to changes and adaptions in our workflows, or not workflows, sorry, in our treatment algorithms. And phenylephrine's a great example.
Yeah, I think you're right on the money there, Zain. You look at a lot of the times when a drug gets pulled off the market, and I'll be honest, I can't remember that many that are pulled off the market for ineffectiveness of a disease state, right? Phenylephrine, they deemed the oral to be ineffective for congestion. You look at things like gemtuzumab, right? That was pulled off the market for toxicity, put back on the market, now. But you look at a lot of like the phase 4 testing, right? After the study's done, they're really looking for toxicities, right? That's why you see some drugs get pulled maybe for toxicities, not really a lot for kind of clinical efficacy, because that's what the trial was supposed to test for, right? And we do treat those trials as, human literature, right? Real evidence-based medicine, right? And that's what it's designed for. And then Zain, you hit it, right? Like once a drug manufacturer, pharmaceutical company gets it approved, they're not going to retest for effectiveness, right? That's kind of shooting themselves in the foot. So.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly said. And I think the other things that are interesting when it comes to testing in general, like how do we test something in a placebo-controlled environment and the entire testing space, is interesting the vacuum that we expose it to. I was having a discussion with a colleague on LinkedIn a little while ago about DTX, like how do we test digital therapeutic agents when having a placebo is very difficult? How do you truly have a representative blinded placebo with a DTX element? And then you have to end up going and doing more head-to-head trials, like having one DTX versus another, or you do an and one or a plus one type of trial. You have common treatment plus a DTX, or just common like practice and treatment. And I think those, at least to me as a clinician, I feel like those have so much more value. And that's why I think that crowdsourcing is so interesting. When we look at, we're looking at tons of variables today, right? We have all these things from pharmacogenomics are now guiding exactly what we're going to prescribe. Well, guess what? No, they're not. Like there's a ton of other variables that are going to tell you if a drug is going to work for a patient or not. And I think there's some interesting elements to be pulled in from that massive, pooling of data when it comes to crowdsourcing and allowing us to look at those aspects that we weren't able to detail before. And placebo certainly didn't allow us to look at when it comes to head-to-head trials, which drug works better for which people and why. And I think phenylephrine, the example there is just really, it didn't work for anybody, and the fact that we weren't able to just crowdsource that fact and be able to pull it off of shelves. And we had grocery stores or convenience stores that were selling these without a pharmacist oversight to individuals for congestion when it wasn't helping at all is really laughable. And I think that's something that we can avoid by using some of the tech that's out there. Any companies or any things that you guys are seeing out in the market and in the crowdsourcing world that you're excited about in particular?
I don't know if there's a specific, I mean, I know there's companies out there. I can't think of them off the top of my head, but I think that the push for, this is a drum that I'm going to beat until the day I die, but, the push for patient controlled records, the patient, patients knowing that, and then also that push back and forth where the patient has a record, is pushing back. And, I'm going to even throw in the word blockchain. Sorry. I mean, I know that's been like kind of, people have so forgotten about it, but there's a very specific utility for blockchain. And one of those is sharing data, knowing where your data is going, the accuracy of that data, and also paying the user for that data, right? And automatically having that go through. And I think like things like that eventually will make it into the fold. I don't know if they'll make it in the fold of healthcare, but the things are being crowdsourced already in other areas, right? How long has it been where we saw like insurance companies putting little pods in our car to see how bad or good of drivers we are, right? Like there are equivalents to that we could do in healthcare, right? How well is this medication affecting your blood pressure? Like you're not relying the patient to write down the pressure. It can just be a device on top on that they're wearing, or and it just is recording data as they're going. So I think that there's a lot of opportunities there. It's just a matter of exploiting is not the right word, but I'm just going to use the word exploiting. But it's about like finding them and exploiting them.
Yeah, there's a lot of data, right, that's being created from EMRs. If you think about, notes and EMRs, physician notes, clinical disease states, labs, things like that you can actually tangibly get out of an EMR. I think the difficult part about this, right, is how do we make sure it's like for like? And when I speak about like for like, a patient can have a disease state, somebody else can have a disease state, but there's all the other factors that you have to look at, right? So you got to make sure you look at the age, the creatinine clearance, things like that make sure that we have a fair kind of observation for efficacy. But if you can pull that data, and that data is, some of that data is discrete, right? So if you can pull that data from EMRs, have it de-identified, have that kind of patient consent being pulled together, I think there's definitely a way you can crowdsource that data to make better decisions, right? And the last thing we want as pharmacists is for our patients to buy drugs or be on prescriptions that aren't effective, right? And so I think the whole, the notion of maybe looking more at effectiveness after a trial, I think crowdsourcing can definitely help that. But, one thing I want to harp on, right, is making sure that data is like for like, and, the right variables are being extracted from that data.
Yeah, and that's a great use case for automation of those kind of tasks, right? Like I think what people need to realize is anytime there's a human element involved in a process, there is chance for error or incongruency, right? Like the way all three of us will look at one picture and we'll come up with three different things, right? But if we can get like a robot to look at it, they're going to keep looking at it the same way because we are telling it what to see and what to look for. And, that kind of goes back to what I say a lot is, that's some of the boring stuff that we need to start automating to help with these. There's just so many use cases if we can automate kind of that back end workflow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that this is the interesting mixture of boring and really exciting, because we've had that promise for a long time that we were going to leverage all this data and be able to pull in those confounding factors you're talking about, Chris, and making sure that we're comparing the apples for apples or like for like components. And it's interesting because we don't often want to do anything other than clinical decision support, or how are we going to diagnose an individual or create, regimens or treatment algorithms and replace healthcare practitioners. But this one is really, it's elevating it in a whole different way, because now we're able to make ourselves smarter faster. with this type of insight and information. One that I like to throw out there just for people to at least look at is the Stuff That Works website. Zane, you and I have talked about it. Chris, we might have talked about it too. But Stuff That Works is just a nice example of crowdsourcing, bringing a lot of individual data into one place. Can it be used as, medical gospel and to, differentiate treatment algorithms? Maybe not, but it can give you some really interesting inferences, almost to a level that all of us have seen before on an antimicrobial stewardship standpoint. Like we don't have all the data on the exact components of an individual's, demographic and or physical and healthcare makeup when it comes to what antibiotic we're going to use. But at least we know what bug was being treated with which drug. And so now we have the ability to start pooling that data together and sharing it amongst groups and having some localized foundations of this works well, it seems like, in this population set or in this area more than it has worked in others. Can you guys think of ways that using crowdsourced data and this kind of data can actually help with health equity and having a more robust kind of bit of information? Zane, you touched on a little bit and made me think of it as patients owning their own data. And to me, sometimes the data that they own, like today, is not representative of them.
No, I mean, you hit it right there, right? Like but we're starting to find out that your genetic makeup is affecting the way drugs interact or you interact with your medications, right? So we can, if we are crowdsourcing, we can stratify things much better than we do now. I think a lot of people don't realize is, women, I can't remember the exact date, but it was very recently where women weren't even allowed in clinical trials, right? There's very little clinical trials for people that look like me. And I'm not, like, it just is what it is, right? I mean, there's, a lot of people, most of the clinical trials are run in huge city centers. So you don't have the rural population or like, people that are homeless. There's just so many things that we don't have a lot of external validity. So for people that don't know, is external validity is taking the results that you have and applying it to a subset of people that are not inside of that study population. So we take a lot of liberties in healthcare sometimes with what we're just paint with a broad brush, and unfortunately that's just what we have. But if we go to a system like this, we can make it a little bit more equitable where, I mean, I remember when I was in pharmacy school, I can't remember the name of the drug, but there were certain drugs that they said that, okay, these drugs are preferred for the African American community for hypertension because they work better, right? And the only way you can find that out is if you are testing medications in the African American community.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great example. Another thing I want to touch on, right, is you talk about clinical trials, and I know in the oncology space, not an expert, right, but read a lot of things that they're kind of pushing in the oncology trial spaces. Why are we, testing with placebos, right? When you have other trials that have tested standard of care, what would trials look like if they're all given the experimental drug, right? As long as it's safe, and then you kind of externally validated against another trials group. And again, those variables have to be like for like, right? Patient inclusion groups, exclusion groups, they have to be very similar in that standpoint. But, bringing it back to you, Zane, you made a really good point, right? Like, how do we get that external validity from those trials? And I think crowdsourcing is definitely a way to do it, right? Because all that data is discrete, right? Your race, your gender, your age. If we can pull that in, we do have a lot of validation going that route. I think the hard part again is, consent, right? Who owns the data? But if it can be de-identified, going to a greater cause, I think that's definitely a point of emphasis to make, right, for this.
I think.
What do you guys think? Oh, sorry, Zane, go ahead.
No. I was going to try to touch on the getting consent part. I think that like our generation and below, and even like the older generation, with the advent of social media and stuff, I think people are more, for better, for worse, are more okay with their data being shared as long as it's being, actually sometimes they don't even care if it's being done something good for them, right? But I mean, in this case, you could be part of something bigger. So I think the consent part from the end user, which is the patient, is, in my opinion, not as big of a hurdle as people make it seem to be.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, and it kind of segues exactly to what I was going to ask you guys is, do you feel like the biggest concerns when it comes to crowdsourcing are related to what? Is it specifically when it comes to privacy?
I don't think it's privacy. I think whenever you're doing crowdsourcing, so like open source projects or products, or you have to have very good um, quality control, right? You need to make sure that the data you're getting is of high quality and it's good quality. So I think that is the biggest thing, in my opinion. Yes, data privacy is up there, 100%. But I mean, we can work around that, right? We can create a overarching thing that can protect the end user with privacy law, whatever, right? We can do all that. But the harder thing is gatekeeping the good information from not so great information.
Yeah, I think you make excellent points there, right? Getting quality data is definitely a concern. I'll say for me, in my opinion, I do think that privacy is a pretty big sticking point, right? You see a lot of kind of different things going on today, personal data being hacked, things like that. The last thing some patients may want is their name being out there, what kind of disease state they have, even pictures being leaked or something like that, right? But there's definitely a way to solve for that, and that's kind of the biggest sticking point for me, right? Let's solve for that privacy data issue. Let's solve for the consent issue. Make sure that we're following HIPAA to the T, but then extracting that data, right? We can de-identify it. I think there's a lot of people that are 33 years old, right? There's a lot of people that are male that are 33, so definitely easy ways to de-identify it, but I think that's key to this.
I think also we have to look into HIPAA laws. I mean, the HIPAA law itself is very archaic. And if you really break it down, all it really says is we need to make a conscious effort to protect the data. It doesn't give you anything like, oh, it has to be two-factor authentication, all this other stuff. It really just gives you like, hey, just try, right? And I think that the HIPAA law itself needs to be more robust so that we can do that. And then I think the data privacy thing for me is a little difficult. I mean, for me, I'm not, and I don't want to say that I'm like overlooking it. I think it's very important, but I think a lot of it has to also do with other things, right? Like education, like creating a good password, and those kind of things. Not clicking on random emails, and that's where a lot of these. There's a website out there. I can't remember right now. Maybe we can link it later, but you'd be surprised at how often healthcare organizations are hacked. It's like a daily occurrence, and hundreds of thousands of records are being hacked daily. And most of it is usually because somebody clicked on an email or their password was leaked, or it was really easy to do. So I think even if you have the most robust privacy policy, I don't think we should stop there. I think that's where we need to keep going and like really like start educating people on digital privacy, because that's something that I think a lot of people overlook.
Yeah, I love that you guys touch on privacy. I agree with both of you. And I do think that the data procurement and the tables that we're setting up, fields and understanding of having something that's unified is important. So we don't have dirty data. I think it's becoming much easier for me to envision dirty data be cleaned by these LLMs that are out there. Now that we're getting, the issue before was the other button. Like you could have all of these individual choices and then someone write in some kind of text, and you had no ability to really quantify that or add a qualitative measure to it. But now, we have some interesting abilities there, but I totally agree with both of you on those sides. The one thing I wanted to bring up though, that I think is interesting is I worry about participation probably the most. And so if we're going to crowdsource something, like who's going to participate in that? Why would they participate in that? And how's it going to benefit them in the long run? And so I think that when it comes to a lot of studies showing who's going to participate in drug trials, who's going to participate in anything to do with improving their health, there are interesting benchmarks, like dollar benchmarks, that I found really fascinating. I think I've talked about it previously, but like $100 will get a lot of people motivated that are middle to high income earners. Low income earners could care less. When you get to the $500 threshold, now you have lower income earners that want to get into that space as well and leverage their data and participate in kind of what they're doing. It's multifactorial on why, but I really think that that is an interesting concern that I'd love to get your guys' thoughts on, and how can we use AI? How can we use technology to help with the participation level of all these individuals with the different cultural, socioeconomic backgrounds to participate in crowdsourcing?
I think that you'd kind of have to start with chronic. For me personally, I think you'd have to start with something mundane, like I shouldn't say mundane. Chronic diseases are not mundane things, but something that somebody's already doing. You start connecting with these patient attached devices, like, diabetes monitors, heart rate monitors, all these things, Fitbits, all that stuff, right? And then kind of get people used to the idea that, hey, with their consent, obviously, that I'm being part of this, right? And then maybe, insurance can be part of it too. Or like, what I think is a great use is, having smart contracts in the blockchain where you sign up and say, okay, I allow my data for the the government agencies, NIH, I'll pay me 50 cents or something per transaction. For drug pharma companies, it's 300, I want, $100 flat fee for 3 months or whatever, right? Something like that, where it's already set up, where they don't have to think about it. They can just put it in and it just goes on. And then in terms of like what they're going to get out of it, I mean, that's a thing a little harder because it's not as obvious, right? So like if you're healthy, I think that's one of the issues we run into healthcare in general is healthier people don't necessarily, I don't say care, but they don't necessarily want to be paying for people that are sick, right? And vice versa. And I think that's just a cultural thing that needs to be changed. And I don't really have an answer for that one.
I think it starts with letting them know about the benefits, right? You look at phenylephrine and now it's deemed to be ineffective for congestion, right? I mean, the benefits are, you participate in this and it's something that you're already doing, right? Somebody's already getting an assessment of you. They're already tracking how well you're doing disease state progressions. That should already be done, right? That data is there. It's really just your consent. And then letting them know, hey, this is the benefit, right? The benefit is in the future, we're going to be able to see what drugs are more effective than others, right? Or drugs that may not be effective. We have that data to support that. All we're asking you to do is participate. You're doing the exact same things that you're doing, and your stuff will be de-identified, right? And I'm sure there's a lot more that goes into the data privacy law. But if you look at, things like Uber, right? They crowdsource for drivers, things like that. It's all about the benefit, right? And what's motivating people. And I think, a lot of people are motivated by doing good. I firmly believe that. And I think this is a very tangible way that, you can feel good about, whatever you're doing, right? By participating, making it a healthier outcome in the future.
And then the other thing, with studies, the reason why some studies take so long is because they can't hit their number needed to treat, right? So for those that don't know, the number needed to treat is what they need to hit, the number of people they need to treat for a certain arm so they can get they can find statistical significance. So if you're crowdsourcing, you could theoretically I shouldn't say churn, but like you could theoretically get through studies much quicker because you have a higher N and get better data, right? So, in terms of, what Chris was saying, like we could, everyone is talking about how medicine moves so slow and, we are not at the cutting edge. Well, this is a way for all of us to help us just get better and better as, and with chronic diseases and also your diseases that are not as common, right? Like the more rare diseases, if we can crowdsource some of that stuff, then maybe we can help them out, right? Like we all saw the Ice Bucket Challenge. I don't even know how many years ago was that, like 5, 6, 10 years ago, something. But to Chris's point, it was something that brought light to it. People, and they had, I think, the most donations in that one little bit amount of time than they did ever, right? So I think it's about, I think people want to be involved in a group and a community in general. So if we can create that group community environment, I think people would do it. I think that's the same reason why social media works, right? People have a feeling of connection. And I think that if we can create that feeling of connection and community and belonging, I think we can get it done.
Yeah, I think that you have to personalize it, right? You have to put a human face to it and something tangible, right? You have to have a community connection to it. I think one really good example for us that's totally outside of healthcare. Have you guys ever heard of like the internet sleuths that they look at cold cases or unsolved crimes? It's amazing what these communities have done when it comes to solving crimes, when they feel like they are making a tangible difference in a collective group, trying to help, right a wrong or to be able to solve a mystery. And I think a lot of healthcare is a mystery. How are we going to do these next steps? How are we going to help the girl down the street that has no other way to be able to find out what's going to be the best treatment for her? Or the members of your community that are very likely to encounter this disease state. Alzheimer's is a really good one. Cancer is a great one that we're all impacted very deeply. Like we can think of a human being we love and care about that has been impacted by a disease. And if we can find a way to be able to help the next generation or someone else in our family or our inner circle avoid some of those issues or be better through our collective kind of brains or that hive mentality, I think there's a lot of wins there, but we have to really humanize some things to get to that point. Any kind of last thoughts from either of you guys on crowdsourcing?
Yeah, no, I think I like crowdsourcing. I think the more heads you have, so trying to solve, collectively trying to work towards a problem, the better off we are. I think I think a lot of us work by ourselves for many different reasons. Either we're too afraid to ask for help, or we just, we don't know who to ask for help. I think this at least gives an avenue for people to work together. And, I think human history has shown us the more we come together, the better off we are.
Yeah, I actually really love the idea of crowdsourcing this healthcare data, right? Doing it the right way just leads to better outcomes for everybody. And I think, this is definitely a viable option, a way to go. And I think, the results, I think they're going to be very interesting, right? Looking at what drugs work better in what population. As long as we have good, clean data and we're getting the right data to make those informed decisions, I don't think there's a con about this, right? As long as it's done right. I think this is going to be pretty powerful if somebody can really manage this.
Totally agree. Yeah, two quick stories on crowdsourcing for me are really, one, talking to a family member that peeked behind a curtain and saw that their physician was Googling their diagnosis and the treatments that they're going to go after. That's a lot of us. Like, we're looking into and researching what's going on. Are we Googling? No, we're hopefully using some kind of, validated method. But being able to update that method so what we're looking at is the best practice possible, we can't get there fast enough without utilizing crowdsourcing. And I think the second piece is, I remember going to, I think it was an ASCP meeting one year. And basically the physician that was talking at the time, he said that one of his biggest difficulties with using algorithms and standardized like best practice medicine was how strong we connect to anecdotal thinking. And so his line to the crowd was, your patients are not that much different. And that's so easy to say and difficult to prove unless we can literally put it in front of them and show them your patients aren't that much different. And here's the best choices for them. And we can even individualize it, by having a like for like thought process. But anyway, all right, guys. Well, that was super fun. We'll do it again next week. If you guys that are listening out there have any thoughts on what you want us to cover, if you want to join Zain, Chris, and I on any episodes, then just let us know. We look forward to the participation, and thanks everybody for watching. Have a great rest of the day.
Bye, guys.
See you guys.